Well, hello friends, welcome back to this restoration series where we're trying to restore this pipe for Jeremy Larsen. And if you saw the earlier videos in the series, you know that this pipe had the misfortune of taking a trip through a snowblower. So we're trying to bring it back into shape. So since the last video, what I've done is I have done shaping here. And you can see that what we now have is a continuous smooth transition between the stem, the band, like the shank extension band, and the stummel. And that is smooth all the way around, so we're in really good shape regarding the extension. The stem, this is flush, and the stem does fit as it would have fit on the original briar. So we're in good shape here. I've done a little bit of sanding on the stem and on the stummel as well, because in order to get this smooth transition it was necessary to sand across all three of them. And fortunately this is a pipe that we're going to have to sand anyway, and there was enough damage on the stem here that we knew we were going to have to do some sanding here as well, so no real loss. The one thing is that sadly the stamping just did not survive except for that P, so we'll probably lose the P when we do the rest of the sanding. It was mostly gone anyway. It was just the LJP, which is unfortunate, but I thought it more important to ensure that we had a smooth transition here than to try and save the stamping in this case, especially given the amount of sanding we're going to need to do to the stummel. I did do some work on the stem. If you recall, there was some fairly large scratching in this area, and I took that out because I was worried that it might subtly alter the shape of the stem a little bit, and it did. And so now that I've gotten that out, I could make sure that everything matched up, that there was no catches here, where the stem would have been slightly smaller diameter than the shank extension. So we still have some work to do on the stem, obviously, but we'll get to that. I think the next thing to do then is going to be to take on the stummel. And you can see I've removed that temporary block. Didn't need that in place anymore. And you know, there's a slight residue of the hot glue there that'll sand off with no issue. But you can see it didn't really cause any problems. I wouldn't do that to a pipe that I wasn't planning on refinishing, but it was plenty strong enough to turn the shank extension, or turn the shank down to accept the shank extension, and it did not in any way affect the briar, so I'm happy with that. Alright, so the sanding, I'm going to start by lightly topping the bowl because there's a couple of nicks here around the top, and we might as well take those out since we are going to be refinishing the whole bowl. So I'll lightly top this on the granite surface plate, and then I'm going to start with 220 grit sandpaper and just sand the entire stummel down and see where I need to do more work. So a lot of these scratches are somewhat superficial, like these guys here, and I think they're going to come out quite easily. Some of them are a bit deeper, like these guys here, and that's where I'm going to have to be careful not to reshape the pipe too much, and if I do reshape it, to make sure that I'm reshaping it all the way around to maintain symmetry. And then there's these guys here. This one in particular is very deep, and I'm a little worried about that one. We'll see how it takes to sanding. Obviously there's going to be some fills on this pipe. That has some acrylic dust in it. Don't worry, it's not going to be a white hand. Yeah, there's going to be fills. There's a couple over here. So depending on how this goes, if sanding this is not producing the reduction in the scratch that I want without dramatically changing the shape of the pipe, I may actually wind up putting a fill in there. And I think that I could, since we're going to contrast stain this, I could probably blend that fill in pretty well. And if anything, it would add a little bit of interest to the pipe. So the sanding is not something that I'm going to record because it's just simply not very interesting to watch. So let me get on with that, and I'll bring you back when we got the stummel close to finished. So after much sanding, we now have the pipe sanded to 600 grit, which is perfectly a fine enough grit for having the pipe ready for staining. And as you hopefully can see, I've managed to get rid of just about all of the scratches, so I'm pretty happy with that. The snowblower damage is no more, essentially. However, this piece of briar is, well, it's a little Swiss cheesy. As you can see, and I pointed this out at the beginning, there's quite a few sand pits in here. And there's also a little bit of stuff going on right up here, which is more like a fine cracking. It doesn't go through at all. It only goes in a short distance, but it's deep enough that I can't sand it out, and it is a defect. Now these are all things that were part of the briar before its unfortunate accident, so anything we do from this point on is going to be improving the integrity of the pipe rather than harming it. Was able to maintain the symmetry pretty well. I think it still looks like a bent billiard, and I think we're in fairly good shape. Also, I did a little bit more sanding on the stem. I still have some work to do in this area here, but yeah, we're getting close to being ready for the buffer now. So we'll set the stem aside, and the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to fill all these little holes. And we'll do that before we stain, so that the stain will actually be taken up by the briar dust that I'm going to embed in the epoxy. So what I'll do is I'm using a 5-minute epoxy. I will mix that with roughly about 25% or so briar dust, just to color it and to give the stain something to hold on to. And I will just go around and fill all of these little holes. And you've seen me do this in other videos, so I'm not going to record it. But you know, basically I'll fill it, let it well up a bit, and leave it. And then I'll probably leave it overnight. And tomorrow I'll be able to sand that all down flush to the surface. So hopefully that will take care of all these fills, and we'll be ready to stain after that. So I'll bring you back as soon as that's done and the epoxy is set and sanded. Okay, so we've got the fills have been applied. You can see the epoxy's been put in place wherever there was a hole and allowed to cure overnight. And now we're ready to do some more sanding. So I'll bring you back when this is all completely sanded and we're ready to. So we've completed sanding now up to 600 grit, and you can see that is already starting to shine the briar. It's starting to polish and burnish the wood. So the question is there such a thing as too much sanding? Now, the best finish you're going to get on a pipe is going to be a product of how careful you are with the sanding. And that means that, you know, you can go all the way up to 2,000 grit, 6,000 grit. You can use micro mesh pads and go even higher than that. However, it's kind of interesting. Once the wood starts to burnish, once you start to get this shine on it, the stain has more difficulty penetrating, and that can actually be a problem if you really want to get a contrast stain, if you're really looking to highlight the grain. So I know that I'm going to put a black stain on this and then sand it off. Therefore, I typically would not go any higher grit than this, and I certainly wouldn't buff this at all. So we're going to stay right here at that 600. I think this is just about right. We've got just about all the scratches out. There are a few spots where, like you can see right here, this is one of the fairly deep scratches that was there. And there's another little one right here. They're not big enough to fill. I tried, and the fill just won't stay. And to sand those any further, I think, is going to be a problem. They're very, very minor. I mean, you can't feel them when you rub your finger across them. So I'm hoping that after we stain and polish this, that's not going to be too evident. But we're going to have to live with them either way. unless we want to really alter the shape of the pipe or rusticate it, and I'd like to avoid both of those. The fills came out fine. I mean, they're ugly right now because they're fills. They're by definition ugly. Some of them are quite large, like this one here in the bottom. But hopefully once we stain this, they'll be less apparent, and I think if nothing else, they're going to look better than having big old sand pits in the pipe. So hopefully Jeremy will agree. Okay, so for staining, what we're going to do is we're going to use the method that I normally have used before and that I've shown you several times. We're going to first off warm the pipe using a heat gun until it's nice and hot, and that's going to help open up the grain. And then we're going to hit it with a black over all the briar surfaces. And I will tape off the shank extension. These alcohol dyes shouldn't stain acrylic, but just to be safe, I'll tape that off. Cover the whole pipe in black, and I'm going to let that set overnight. And then tomorrow I will sand that off. And sanding it will leave just the stain that's embedded in the grain. And then I will come back with a coat of this brown mahogany. And I'm choosing this because I think, given the number of fills and given the, sort of mediocre grain in this pipe, there's some bird's eye there that wants to be seen, but it's just very, very light, and the contrast stain isn't going to help that. So given that, I think a darker brown sort of color is going to be the best choice here. So you will be able to see some of the grain coming through, but it's going to be a darker pipe. And yeah, well, we'll see how that looks. The nice thing about stain is you can always sand it back off again. Okay, so I will do that, and I'll bring you back. Oh, the other thing I need to do is I need to do a little bit of final sanding around the stem. As you can see, this is pretty close. I've done this with the micro mesh pads. It will go to the buffer eventually, but there's a few spots here, like there's a little nick right up in here that I need to take care of. So I'll touch that up while I'm waiting for the stain to dry. And then we'll take a trip over to the buffer, and I will bring you back for the finished pipe. Well, folks, we are done with this bent billiard from J. Peretti that we have been working on for Jeremy Larsen. And I hope Jeremy likes what he's seeing here. The staining came out, I think, nicely. We were able to accentuate some of the grain and even pick up a little bit of that bird's eye that was hiding on the side here. Yeah, the grain's a bit odd in spots. It's somewhat wild, and there's a few dead spots, but I think it adds character. There are fills, and the fills were, largely hidden, but there's a few that are going to stand out. This one on the bottom I'll call your attention to because this was a rather large hole, and it did pick up the black stain, but of course a spot that large is going to be difficult to hide, and especially in that sort of a grain pattern. There's also a few scars on this, and I won't point those out, but you can probably see them. Those are areas where I had sanded, and the pipe is perfectly smooth, so there's no ridges or anything. But I had sanded to the point where if I sanded more, it was going to really change the shape of the pipe. And those areas just picked up a little bit more stain than I would have liked, but they're not terrible, and they add character and they tell the story of the pipe. So I think overall I'm pleased with the color combination here. So this was a black counter stain followed by a dark walnut stain, and then of course it was buffed on the buffer using Triple E, then white diamond, and finally a coat of carnauba wax on everything. The shank extension is all polished up now along with the stem, and as you can see that cream swirl is prominent throughout, and I think that does a nice job of sort of offsetting the darkly colored briar and the black stem. Gives a little bit of interest there, and of course it saves the shape of the pipe, which I think was very distinctive. And that it is a shank extension, so the stem still comes off. I still have to clean the stem up from the buffer a bit. And yeah, the stem is in very good shape now. We were able to get rid of all the scratches and buff that up to a nice high gloss. So overall, we have a finished pipe that I'm really hoping Jeremy will be glad to put back into his collection and to start smoking once again. I'm sure it will smoke exactly as it did before because we did absolutely nothing to the inside of the pipe, but we did quite a cosmetic overhaul to the outside. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this. If you did, and you're a subscriber, you'll of course get notifications for future videos. If you're not subscribed, please go ahead and click the subscribe button so you can get updated as I do these projects. And if you're interested in any pipe restoration work, pipe cleaning, anything like that, I've got an extensive set of playlists on various pipes that I've restored, and a couple of methods type videos that you're certainly welcome to check out. I also have a website, canerodpipes.com, and I'd love to have you stop by, and if there's anything that I can do to help you, please be sure to get in touch. So that finishes up this video on the LJ Peretti bent billiard, or as I've come to know it, the snowblower pipe. I hope you enjoyed seeing the process, and until next time, I will look forward to talking to you all again very soon. Goodbye now.